topic, and so I'm hoping to have some Q&A time if any of you guys have some specific questions. So we'll just kind of play that by ear. I can be kind of long-winded. I'll try not to do that because I want to make sure if you have questions to get a chance to answer, because there's so much to this. But just a little background again of who I am. I'm 38 years old. I've been married for 15 years. I've got 4 daughters, ranging from about 12 to 2. And they're all, my wife homeschools them all, and she does a great job with that. I'm an associate pastor at Cornerstone World Outreach in Sioux City, Iowa. You might have heard of my infamous brother, Kerry Gordon. He's a senior pastor there. I help with church administration. I've been involved with youth ministry. I preached my first sermon to the youth department at 11 years old. And basically from 11 on, I've been involved in some capacity with youth ministry. At the age of 19, I started a young adults ministry that's still going today at our church called Shama. We've ministered to hundreds of college students on campus, off campus, special events. So got some background with that, with young adult ministry. And I've been highly involved with campus evangelism, both on campus, off campus events for hundreds of college students. I've worked on staff at our church's Christian school. So I created the first college weekend workshop. I created this curriculum. The first one was in 2006 that we did. And then in 2009, we worked on this college weekend workshop. It's a unique thing. And we kind of promoted on a national scale to be used in churches in small groups. And to this day, that was 10 years ago, was the last time I actually did one of these, but well, it's not officially, I guess, but in some formats it's still been ongoing. But other churches use it in their small groups, and the curriculum and things that were produced from that. And if you're interested, College Weekend Workshop, it took thousands and thousands of dollars to produce, and you can go on my YouTube page and basically watch it all for free. It's uploaded, Chace Gordon, C-H-A-C-E, Chace Gordon on YouTube, and you can find the College Weekend Workshop links so you can see what we talked about then. So why did I do College Weekend Workshop? Well, obviously there's a problem when you have, at the time when this was formulating, the statistic was something like 85% of teens leave their faith after high school. And, so I began to ask, so what are we doing wrong here? Because it ought not be. If we have the truth, we shouldn't be losing the culture. So we're doing something wrong. I mean, we've got the best message in the world. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. We shouldn't be losing unless we are doing something wrong. So wanted to kind of take responsibility. What can we do to change this? What are we doing wrong as a church? What are we doing wrong as parents? What can we do better? What is happening on the college campuses that have contributed to this phenomenon? I've had glimpses of that, of course, too. Being involved with college ministry, having many peers. At the time I started this about 19 years old when I really started getting into what was happening on the colleges. And you could see, obviously, Sodom and Gomorrah, the dorm rooms. And so I started to study this out. I wanted to do something to prepare people spiritually for college so they don't shipwreck their faith. It was at the time, it was the largest project I'd ever undertaken. It was a great deal of research, hundreds of man hours, and years of study, literally. We created workbooks, curriculum, scripted video audio materials, gathered testimonials, conducted phone interviews, promoted locally and marketed to contacts across the United States, created self-tests and evaluations, assembled a book table of assorted college campus materials and additional research for both parents and students. Then I joined up with a friend of mine named Mark Neurath and his creative team in California to do a relaunch of College Weekend Workshop on a larger scale. We added a webcast, a promotional website. We flew in guest experts, including Ben Shapiro. If you've heard of Ben Shapiro, he took part in this. Dan Smithwick, anybody heard of Dan Smithwick? He created the Peers test. He's a specialist in biblical worldview. We flew these guys in. They participated. We got copyright permissions for different parts of our material. Gathered national attention for a one-of-kind project unlike anything else out there. We stirred up literally tens of thousands of angry atheists that found us through reddit.com. We were labeled as a Christian hate group on Free Thoughtpedia. We were mocked by Jon Stewart on The Daily Show. We had property vandalized. We had people come to throw rocks and break windows. We had atheist tracts that were distributed. Atheists have tracts. If there's evidence of the existence of God, it's that atheists are writing tracts all about God and distributing them. This guy showed up in an old beat-up van to our youth department, dropped off these tracts to convert Christians to atheists, and drove off really fast. The crazy thing. It was a lot of fun, is what it was. We also helped a lot of people, and now it's basically giving it all away for free to whoever wants the information. The material, again, is still being used by youth groups, pastors, small group studies, parents, teens, and college students in numerous states across the country. So, what do we talk about? Just to kind of give an overview, obviously I don't want to bore you to tears with every little detail that may or may not interest you, but we just kind of, the first class was called Ready, Set, Get a Life. And that was just like basic principles, take personal responsibilities, make good choices, have a plan, and just basics. This is how you succeed in general as a young person entering into this stage of your life. There's a man that I greatly admired to describe life in 3 phases. From 0 to 30, he called the receiving phase of your life. That's when you're receiving. That's where you're getting information, you're growing. From 30 to 60, he called the building phase. That's where you're applying what you've learned in your life. And then from 60 and up, he described as the imparting or the giving phase. That's when you give back. That's when you're mentoring the next generation. And he says and he was a gruff guy. He spoke very, very black and white. He says, if you mess up the first 30 years of your life, you'll be a loser the rest of your life. That's what he said. And you think about that. And obviously, there's exceptions to that, but in general, there's a principle there. And you think about that. What are young people doing to the age of 30? You've got, in school, nobody expects anything from the kid. They graduate from high school. They're not going to college. Generally, generally, a lot of the underlying motive is I want to go have fun, essentially. It's like there's that recent controversy, what's her name, Lori Loughlin, the Full House gal, and her daughter, that they had an interview, or they had some recording of her daughter saying, I want to go to college, I don't care about school. She actually says that, I just want to party and experience things. It's like, well, great. So that's, that bride money is even less valuable now. But he says, so a lot of young people, they go to college, they really don't know what they're doing. They just, they want to have fun. And so that they want to have fun, well now, so they get out of school at 24, 25, first 30 years, the critical years for a foundation for your life. And then 25 to 29, you've got all these newly acquired bad habits from college, and you just want to make money, or you're living at home with your parents after you graduate 4-year university, and so then it's all about money. Well, money is not what's fundamental to life, and so the focus is all off, and it's like 30 years wasted. I mean, we call 20-somethings adultolescence now, because there's this procrastination of maturity and what were general markers of maturity. And so it's very important that young people are deliberate, and that they're making application to their faith. They're not just filling their heads full of information, but they're making practical application so that they can go on to be strong, successful individuals. And so that was class 1. Class 2, walking through the campus of the shadow of death. And that class was basically designed to kind of, these are the pitfalls, these are the things that are typically the things that mess up young people's lives at college. These are the things to watch for. And this is the first one, and this one's maybe not as emphasized as much as it needs to be. But I would say one of the biggest pitfalls of college is the alienation process, alienation from church and family. I think when you get there and then they isolate you and they say, you don't need that old way of thinking, you're going to be a critical thinker. And so they distance them from their values and say, you don't need those, you want to be a critical thinker. And that means speaking exactly like the way we tell you to. And so they distance themselves and it's really, so you cut off the lifeblood of a foundation and stuff, then there's going to be consequences. And there's definitely an agenda in our culture to indoctrinate and socially re-engineer young people to think like secular humanists. And so that's a major pitfall, is get them in an environment where there's rampant sin and no church and no parent, no accountability, and just say, just have fun. In fact, I'm going to put you in a dorm room with a bunch of in a co-ed area where there's alcohol going around and there's people having sex next to you and all that, and we'll just try that out. Well, that's not going to have good results, not spiritually speaking, or in other ways either. Obviously, another pitfall is the alcohol and drug abuse that goes on the college campus, the humanism, the propaganda that's in the classroom, that's all. This is the way I would say it. If anybody read the Humanist Manifesto, essentially, if you were to take the teachings of Scripture and the Humanist Manifesto, they are polar opposite in the conclusions. In other words, and this is a good way to expose if your Christian belief is not really Christian, because what happens is if we don't know how to think biblically, which is why I brought in someone like Dan Smithwick, who is a biblical worldview expert. If we don't think biblically, by default, we will think humanist, because that's how the culture thinks. And so it's very important that if you don't have convictions on an issue, you will probably default to be an echo to the culture. And so it's very important that you have the foundation of knowing what the Word of God teaches to form your belief system, because you will default to the Humanist Manifesto and think that that's Christian when it's actually opposed to everything that Christianity is. And so, just a point of reference. So humanism is a pitfall, because then you've even got people that are calling themselves Christians, but it ceased to be Christianity. It's just a bumper sticker. It's just a name brand, and it's soulless and it's empty. And you've got people that are that think they're Christian, but they don't know what the Bible says. So that's obviously very important for a young person to actually have convictions for what they believe, because there's a new definition of faith in the culture, and it's not about beliefs, it's not about faithfulness, it's not about diligence, it's about a journey. Well, that's kind of a product of the carryover of moral relativism into every area, where we distance ourselves from the absolutes, we distance ourselves from right and wrong, and everybody's making it up as they go along. And consequently, you have a church that follows, and young people that are following the downhill slide of the culture, because they're not anchored to the truth. So, okay, I'm starting to preach here, but I'm supposed to talk about College Weekend Workshop. The other pitfall that I would add, and this is a big pitfall as well, is campus spirituality. Campus spirituality. And that is basically what I was starting to describe. And that's when you have a Christian shell that is basically a humanist center. And campus spirituality, and there's this thinking with that when and this is something that's changed in the culture too. If you think of, it used to be like the Ivy League schools, like Harvard and Yale, that were famous institutions that are really anti-Christian. They're very secularist, don't bring up God and stuff. The culture has changed a little bit on that. And so it's not as secular humanist as much as it is cosmic humanist, which is essentially what's happened. And this shift actually began, I would say, one of the demarcations is if you saw, this is going way back now, but if you saw, and there's been shifts since then, but in 2008, when Obama was being elected at the time, the convention, it was like a cult meeting. I mean, it was that Democratic convention when pre-President Obama was. It was like they're all of a sudden the same party that booed God and all things. In that sense, there's all this religious language There's all this. I mean, it's almost like a church service, and that's kind of happened to some degree on the college campus as well. Is you have something that essentially it's the same pagan humanist belief that's anti-scripture with a religious garb, and that describes much of college campus spirituality. Is it has the clothing of religion, but there's no heart in it, and there's no Christ in its center. And so that is a killer, because people go on the college campus, or you send your young person to a college. Well, they're Christian. That's a Christian school. And unfortunately, on the college campus, a Christian school is, again, it's a brand. Doesn't mean they're a Christian school. It means that they're wearing the Christian brand. And how can you get? It's difficult to get too worked up over a college campus that claims to be Christian, that is teaching pagan values that are anti-Christian, when the pastors themselves in our culture are also teaching the same pagan values in the name of marketing, that we backed off the power and the truth of the gospel to tell people what they want to hear. And so, but I digress. So campus spirituality, because it looks like it's Christian, but it's not. And so it causes people to be deceived, and they think exactly like the world. They absorb the same propaganda that's in the world, and they destruct. Because we have the power and the truth of the gospel. That's the truth that sets people free. And if we give them something watered down and weak, and that's not true, we're dishonest. We're either liars or we're fools. And neither of those are good scenarios. So that's a major issue. Obviously, I see Dork has gotten into some controversy here over things that I would say are pretty common for Christian colleges, that things that are marketed as Christian, standing for things that are historically orthodox, biblically anti-Christian in their bent. The third class was called Snakes with PhDs, and that was basically exposing, refuting humanistic philosophies that are abundant on the college campus, as well as inform the student of the persecution that can happen on a college campus. I'll tell you a story. There's a lady who was a student of USD, and she was going to school, and they had a guest speaker that was there to talk about homosexuality. And so when he came in, he began to hand out these true and false questions across the classroom, and it used these true and false questions used religious language to make it look like Jesus was for homosexuality, even though the scriptures plainly teach against it as sin. And so he distributed this, and she just stood there and kind of froze, and he came and she was starting to get upset, and he came to talk to her, and she said, and he was saying things about Christianity to advance something that's not Christian. And so she got upset, and when he came to her in front of the classroom, what's going on? Why aren't you doing this? And she said, this is a lie. This is wrong. And she got angry, and she left the class. Well, this is what he didn't know. This girl was a former lesbian whose parents themselves, whose mom lived a lesbian lifestyle. She's seen the dark underbelly of a lifestyle that's in the bondage and the things that aren't marketed on all the TV shows and things like this. And she had a very personal connection with the subject. And so when to misrepresent the Bible, and it offended her. And so she left. Well, consequently, as a result of that she was brought in. They threatened to kick her out of the school. They threatened to remove her from the school. They would not give her accreditation unless she went through mandatory counseling because she had the wrong view on homosexuality. So if she didn't change it, they weren't going to give her credit. That is filtering out a particular worldview and putting a particular worldview into certain positions of influence in the culture and denying a historically Christian worldview from those same positions. And that's dangerous because that's exactly what Marxism has done in other countries. That it's really, and folks, it's not about this anti-homosexuality thing as much as practicing homosexuals and to some degree are being used to advance an agenda that goes far far deeper than just that issue. They're being used as a bully club to bring a whole bunch of other things in that aren't even connected to homosexuality. So, popular topic. I'm not shy to talk about these things because I think the truth is important. And anyway, this is some verses I want to look at. Daniel chapter 1, verse 3 through 5. It says, this is the story when the Israelites about to go into captivity in Babylon. And it says, then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. This story tells us that in the book of Daniel, when they took these young prospects in to become eunuchs and to learn how to be good Chaldeans. It was a 3-year period. Guess what? By the beginning of this process to the end of this process, they're fully converted in understanding the language of that culture, that they've been fully indoctrinated in that time period, so that they can be effective people in Babylon, effective Babylonians. And that is the same time period of a 4-year college. In 3 years, they can take a young Jewish boy and turn him into a faithful Chaldean. And it's the same number. It's a 3 years or that many months. It's the same for a 4-year university. The same thing goes on the college campus, that they want to, by the time the student arrives as a freshman to the time they graduate in 4 years, they've been fully indoctrinated and socially re-engineered. And look at what they did. But when they brought him in and they instructed him in all these things, the other thing that it says is that they gave them, appointed them for a daily provision of the king's delicacies and the wine which he drank. That was the bait. Because it wasn't just, in order for them to absorb the propaganda, what they wanted to do is let them have a taste of the palace life. Let them have the king's delicacies. Let them have some of the king's wine, because then by association, that lifestyle is attracted to them. That pleasure that is produced, those things are attracted to them, so they start to absorb the propaganda. The same reason is why many colleges have the dormitory mandatory, that you stay in the dorms while you're at college, because if that student is active sexually or doing other things that they regret in the dorm room, when they hear something that goes against their belief system in the college room by their professor, rather than say, no, that's not right, they're less likely to speak up, because they're going to, you know what, I'm a sinner too, or I'm guilty too, I've done some wrong things too, I can't speak up on that. And so what they do is, in that environment, because they've compromised themselves, because they've tasted of the king's delicacy, so to speak, they've been seduced by that thing, that they become less vocal, and so they just quietly, they're quieter about it, and that passivity or that silence results in eventually either succumbing to it or allowing, or at least enabling the propaganda and those things to go on unopposed. And so that's that same story that we see in the book of Daniel happens on college campuses all the time. So class 4 was with friends like these who needs enemies. This basically deals with how important it is for the college student to have the right relationships in their life, because relationships will make or break you. And of course, we discussed the fundamental relationships. Of course, your relationship with God, your relationship with authority, and your relationship with your peers, and having the good kind of relationships in your life will be a huge help in those college years. And then in the last class, we called Lemmings on Parade, and it was basically about helping people evaluate post-high school options, and talking about some choices that the graduate has in terms of what kind of school they go to, or what their post-high school decision would be. So the old theory of going to college is step one, go to college, get an education. Step two, have education, make lots of money. That's essentially the theory that's put forth, and why you have to get an education, because you have to get an education, you have to go to college, you have to get an education, and you have to have that education so you can make lots of money. That's essentially the formula that's put forward. The more common scenario is this. Step one, go to college to be free from parents, party with your friends, and have lots of guilt-free sex. That's kind of step one. Step two, change your major multiple times because you don't know what you want to do with your life yet. You're too busy acting like a clown. Step three, skip church so you can focus on making money, building your career, and paying off all your school loans. And step four, find out what you want to do with your life so you can make more money to support all of your newly acquired bad habits. So that's kind of the scenario that we see so common in the culture. So anyway, again, you can see this in depth online on my YouTube page if you want to go watch those. College students eat them up. They love that information. It's useful for parents in making those decisions of because the other thing to evaluate is is your high school student even ready for college? Because many of them aren't. They're not ready for what they're about to experience. They want to make sure that they're solid and they're grounded before you launch them out into an environment that they're not ready for. So anyway, this material was written clear back in 2009. So fast forward 10 years, what has changed? I would say just a few points on that. I would say homeschooling has the potential to revolutionize education, and it's in the crosshairs of liberal activists daily. Homeschooling is incredibly powerful, and that's why it's so vehemently opposed. It's been quite a journey these past 10 years, but now about a decade later, I told you about, just kind of hit some snippets of all that was produced, all the hours of study, all the research, all the curriculum, all the interviews, nationally known speakers, different people that all participate in different things. After all this in this curriculum, there's an even better answer than attend college weekend workshop. Even better answer to help young people survive spiritually on the college campus, which if applied would render my one-of-a-kind program of blood, sweat, and tears almost obsolete by comparison. Homeschool your kids. I saw a statistic that was just rattled me like, wow. Again, I told you the statistic was common. 85% of teens after high school leave their faith. There's a statistic of Christian homeschool parents that 85% of Christian homeschool kids keep their faith after high school. And so, in direct contrast with the vast majority of public school kids who fall away. This parental and cultural paradigm shift concerning education alone could reshape America. And so you say, are you telling me that I have to homeschool my children? What I'm telling you is that you already are. And this is proof. Whether your kid is going to public school or not, what this says is it says the power of parental influence to shape your children. And so homeschool is powerful. And just to see this, like, wow. Because it's a lot harder to come in with a young person who's already, this is another reason why teens lose their faith in the college years, is because their faith hasn't been tested in the teen years. That's kind of a big thing, because the old formula, in some ways, youth ministry at the church, a lot of times it's entertainment centered, or it's very, very shallow, or it's come and talk about, hey, be friendly, hey, be nice. And then you have a youth pastor who's like, let's get the guy to be the youth pastor who's the most immature that the teens will like. Let's get the most immature youth pastor who can act the most like a teenager. Here's another paradigm shift. Teens don't need adults that act like teenagers. They need adults who act like adults that can help them become adults. And so I've said I've been a youth pastor forever, but as a youth pastor, I said I am not interested in being cool to you. at all. I'm interested in you growing up and not being a flop and a failure. I'm interested in you by the time that I'm done with you, that when you get out, and really my role, I'm like way down the influence scale versus parents. So this is another thing if you're a youth pastor or if you know anything about that. If you're in an argument with the parents win every time. So it's not even, the parent is so influential and they're always more influential than they think they are. They always are. But my job, the way I perceive it is, my job is to help you to one day become a successful adult. And one of the ways that you do that is they need to be making practical application to their faith as a teenager, and not because what happens is a lot of young people will coast in their faith all through high school, and then they get to college and they've never actually applied it in the real world. Their head's full of information or not full of information, depending on the quality of the Bible teaching in that which they're receiving. But they get to college, they're untested, and they fall. Because it's very important in order for them to be stable and survive in a very hostile towards Christian culture, is you have to know what you believe and you have to know the truth of God's Word because you've applied it and you see the fruit from it. And you have to have some strong convictions because you're going to be challenged. I like one thing Ben Shapiro said when he spoke back in 2009, is he said, really, in some ways as a Christian, he's not a Christian, he's an Orthodox Jew, but he says that as a person of faith, he said, you're really at a disadvantage if you're a liberal when you go to school because you're not going to be challenged. You're not going to be challenged in your view because you're just, I should be able to have sex with many people as I want. I should be able to drink. I should be free to be me and love me some more of me. I should be like that. If you're a Christian, you're going to be told all the time, every day, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're a bigot. You're a homophobe. You're judgmental. It's funny how everybody who doesn't follow Jesus is an expert on what Jesus would do. But they've never read what Jesus actually did, but they sure know what he would do, and it's not what you're doing. But if you're a Christian, you actually have an advantage in the sense of that persecution. You're going to have to study harder to know why you believe what you believe. You're going to have to know your stuff because you're going to be challenged every day. And if you go into that focus, you can come out of that environment even stronger than when you went into it. But it's very important that it's very important for a young person that if you're passive in your faith and you're just hearing information and you're not making application practically to what's being taught, which is why I think a biblical worldview course is very, very, very beneficial. Just to have a stronger understanding of why you believe, what the Bible says about it, and how it applies in the real world. If you've made application, being a doer of the word, not a hearer only, deceiving your own self, you're more likely to be stronger in your faith when you go into that kind of a challenging environment. Okay, moving on. Another point, Marxism 10 years ago was openly taught on the college campus while covert operatives maneuvered in politics. But the crazy stuff that was taught on the college campus and nowhere else that was once covert in the culture and politics is now overt. It's like we went from at least they had to be secretive about it to now, no, we're just blatantly Marxists. We're just blatantly communists. That's how much we've shifted. And the things that were crazy, because everybody, even for decades, this isn't even a new thing. This is before I was even born. I was born in 1980. That in the 60s and 70s and farther back, that college institutions were known for professors and crazy things that are being taught that don't apply anywhere else in the real world, but they hear it on the college campus. And they hear those kinds of things, and then it would kind of be covertly believed in society. They'd be secretive, and just, I wonder if that Democrat's really a communist. Well, now they're unashamedly, openly Bernie Sanders crazy communism, and that's where the culture has gone. Well, what happened? What happened is education has re-engineered young people, and we have, as Christians, as parents, as teachers and those things, we have to get involved to speak the truth and not be cowed by this silence of free speech nonsense that really is. Here's something else about young people. You think, man, these young people today, they believe some crazy things. They really don't. What they have is they have a very shallow worldview. It's like very kind of on the fly, in the moment. Well, what is everybody else saying? Yeah, that sounds good to me. Well, what are they posting on Facebook? How many likes did they get on that post on Facebook? Sounds good with me. I'm in on that one. They're really easy to evangelize. You know why? Because they haven't even really heard the truth. And if you just tell them the truth and speak openly, you'd be surprised how open they actually are. And so don't be intimidated by young people that have been indoctrinated just because they have really strong opinions. Those opinions are based on nothing. And it comes down like a house of cards. And so when you have the truth, you don't have to be intimidated by a myth. And so when truth is on your side, you don't have to be intimidated by that. And it's not a hopeless cause. We just have to not be cowed into silence on these very important issues that shape lives. So anyway, what we see in the culture to some degree is fruit of the indoctrination that happens in the public education system and in colleges. We're seeing the fruit of that. It's now leaked out into the culture because you've had a whole generation that's come up that's all they hear. And so of course that's what they believe because that's all they hear. And so it's important that we share the truth. Another thing that obviously that speaks to the climate, I mean, we are living in a time where Donald Trump is the president of the United States. This is a wild time to be alive. Antifa is a thing. You know, the violence on the college campuses have amped up. Not everywhere, but eventually, I mean, that was the thing. When I started, I remember with my mother-in-law, I remember at the time when I was doing college weekend workshops, she's from a small town, Jefferson, Iowa, if you know where that is. And she's like, well, that's it. That's just the big cities. That's not Jefferson. Everybody's great here. What are you talking about? No, we're fine. They don't need that. That's just for the really big cities. They have lots of problems, but we're okay here. We're a small town. And then she saw her grandchildren go through the Jefferson school system and some of the stuff that they were hearing that just kind of rocked her world. That it's everywhere. And so we're living in a time where things are really, really polarized. Free speech is now openly opposed. I mean, it's like, it's not even, free speech used to be a thing that liberals would talk about. We need free speech. Now it's like, nope, that's bad now. Nope, not free speech. I mean, Ben Shapiro, who's like banned from college camps. He's like this tall. He's not a threatening person. I mean, he works out, but he's not really a threatening person. But you can't hear an opposing view. That's too dangerous. We've got to have mandatory counseling because Ben Shapiro's coming to my school. Conservative thinkers are banned from even speaking at college campuses. Our culture has become more tribalistic and divided. We're all easily offended, and everyone employs their own brand of situational ethic, detached from spiritual and moral absolutes. There are things that are desperately wrong with Republicans as well as Democrats. That's why we have to make sure that our principles are correct and we don't just get into tribalism because sometimes the tribe is wrong. And so we have to make sure that we know what we believe and what truth is and what right is and what wrong is. And if the party does wrong, you stick with what is right. What is true, what is right, what is godly. Your Christianity, for those of you that maybe we have some agnostics or other things in the room. As a Christian, your faith needs to come first. You should be a Christian before you're anything else. Anyway, the other phenomena, of course, is with millennials and post-millennials. Millennials are generally characterized as ill-equipped to face reality, living life governed by their feelings. Those feelings include inadequacy, anxiety, sense of entitlement, and self-delusion. They're known for short attention spans, fantastic idealism, and quitting things. They rarely make eye contact when carrying cell phones. They're addicted to technology and social media. They're fond of hashtags, emojis, selfies, and autocorrect. Often lack depth but despise hypocrisy, sometimes referred to as snowflakes. That's what millennials are characterized now. And it's not all them. It's not obviously. Obviously, somebody raised those millennials. Somebody pastored those millennials. We have to give people the truth. And we have to not just tell them this is what you got to do. We got to demonstrate it, and we got to give practical application so that they'll be grounded and solid. Solutions. I'm going to put forth some solutions. I don't want you to just think this is all doom and gloom, the world's all burning and it's all over, because it's not. Homeschooling is the best long-term fix I have seen. I would say homeschooling, years ago they were talking about, Hillsdale College, the fact that it doesn't receive government money. It is a secular university, but it doesn't receive government funds. In some ways, it's easier to be a Christian at Hillsdale College than it is on a supposed Christian campus because at least there's not some of the ties to the curriculum and the requirements and things. Or there's not ties with government funding, which has some input as to the kinds of curriculum that can be produced and things of that nature. So Hillsdale College, great thing. Grove City, there's lots of colleges that are kind of trying to follow that template. I think really in some ways that's already too late. I think it's good, but honestly I think homeschooling is the best solution I've seen, which is why it's such a battle. Strong involvement with local church as a family. I think that's really, really important. I think church is sometimes treated like everything else in Western culture, as we have kind of this consumer mindset. I'm going to go to church. Well, I like how the music sounds here, or this really scratches this itch over here, and we kind of treat it like we're shopping. When what we really need to do is we need to get somewhere. We need to be strongly involved and not be shoppers, but committed members, and do it as a family. That's huge, because honestly, if as a parent you can talk the talk, your young person, they know if you're a hypocrite. They know what you look like. They know if the person at home is not the same person as at the church building. So if your young person sees that you're serious about your faith and you're involved, they're going to be more inclined to be involved, and they're going to be more serious about their faith. So that's another thing. Less emphasis on self-worth, more emphasis on doing worthwhile things. We have created a culture of narcissists, that we have told them how wonderful they are so long that I'm pretty great. I get an award for finishing last place in a race. I'm pretty special. Well, the real world's not like that. So if that might be what your race, and then you hit reality, guess what? You're going to be in a culture shock when you get last place, or you don't show up to work on time, and they don't pat you on the head and tell you how wonderful you are. So it's important that, again, the practical application, not just tell people this is what you got to do, but demonstrate, make sure they have an outlet for practical application. Life applications need to be made early, or they will coast mentally, spiritually, physically, etc., and be thrown off track in college. Know what you want to do with your life before going to college, not discover it at college. I think this should be a factor as well. Don't buy into the marketing of, or the, Ben Shapiro said on the radio, or on his podcast a couple weeks ago, he said, talking about part of the scam with college admissions, he says a lot of college, it's about two things. It's about what do they use? Credentialism. It's about getting that stamp. I went to this school, and it's about what do you say? I just lost it. Networking. It's about being able to. And this from the guy who drops that he went to Harvard more than anybody I've ever heard. It is a networking. It is a social networking outlet for people, because people aren't going to church and making relationships at church like they used to, or on the job as much. And so now the colleges and the prestige of that is also this networking thing that's going on. But it's important that you know what you want to do with your life before you go to college. I mean, Jesus knew his career path at 12 years old. He was like excited, ready to go. It's when your young person goes to so that you're not sitting with massive debt where they move back in with you after graduating 4 years. It's not the best to have the mindset that when I go to college, then I'm going to figure out what I want to do. So there's things that the young person can do in advance to at least kind of get a little bit more narrowing the field, so that they're not just spending all kinds of money changing their majors multiple times, and they graduate and they're just as confused as when they went in, and now they have a drinking problem and a newly acquired sex addiction. So it's important that they have, and this is an evaluation factor for parents, and what it is how academically focused is your young person. Then that should, if they want this prestigious high-end school, if they're not academically focused, send them to community college. You know, if they're going to go, let them get some of the basics, let them get some of the generals, but don't spend high dollars on them to kind of drink and party. So start, but if they know what they want to do, great. There's also options out there. You don't have to, you don't have to do the traditional brick and mortar colleges anymore. There's stuff online now, and there's other options out there. But it's important that they have some focus before they get there, and also that they're spiritually mature enough to handle it. If they aren't spiritually mature and they're not academically focused, then maybe they need to work for a year. Maybe they need to do an internship. Maybe not rush off to college right away. Or start slow. It's like, okay, well, we do some schooling. Let's just do some community college for a while, and then we can transfer. We can transfer to that school a little later on. Those are maybe some prudent decisions there. That's saying, don't let finances and money be the driving factor in where the young person goes to college. Don't let money make the decision, because there's a lot of bad decisions made based on cheap. So you just got to balance that. Again, biblical worldview training, highly recommended. My friend Mark Neurath, he has created something called worldviewinstitute.com. Excellent for churches, small groups, or if you've heard of Truth Project, and you've heard of Truth Project, it's kind of similar format. The Truth Project is great as well. But just to get a little more understanding, that's really great for young people in advance, that they have a little bit of grounding before they go into that environment. Live off campus if at all possible. Scout out churches in the area. Campus ministry is not adequate. I won't say some of the content of campus ministry discussions based on the age of some of the people in this room. But I will say that campus ministry, they have a good campus ministry. Inadequate, don't rely on campus ministry to be the driving force for your young person's spiritual well-being. There needs to be something stronger, something more grounded, a good church in the area, or if there's a campus that's close to home where they can live at home, and participate with church and locally and stuff, that's a good option too. Establish your convictions early, so less likely to compromise later. That's kind of advice for college student people, high school graduates. Is when you go in, establish you are up front. Yes, it would get more persecution, but also it's a way that you can be accountable just from the relentless pressure. You define yourself early. I'm a Christian. You may get a little bit ostracized by that, but at least, and that's good. The Bible says, rejoice if you're persecuted. That's actually a good thing. But if you establish your convictions early, that will help you be a little less tempted to make bad decisions that can come later on. If you're an obscure, in-the-closet Christian for the first 6 months of college, you're going to get exposed to way more if you're very clear on who you are and what you believe up front, so that nobody has any like I said, you might get some persecution, but at least that persecution will actually be a good thing for you to set that up front. Be highly academically focused to not waste time and money. Consider community college to stay close to home. There's less groupthink, indoctrination, save money and get generals out of the way. Community college has the most diverse spectrum. Not like you won't have, you can have crazy communist professors in a community college, just as anywhere else. But the advantage of the community college is they're far more diverse in the faculty versus in some of the other traditional colleges. There's more groupthink, and it's not just one class. It's one class after another class after another class, plus the dorms and everything else. So community college, even though you will hear communist stuff, you will hear crazy things from some professors, that's not universal. That's not cross. And then of course that's not universal. That not just. I mean, there's you can have a bad college with good professors, obviously. So it's not a universal thing, but at least at community college in general, they have the widest spectrum of views. Christian college is not really a thing most places anymore. It's a brand to appeal to naive Christians. Hillsdale College model that doesn't receive government funding. We talked about that. Online schooling, work internships. Don't choose scholarships over your child's soul. There's a book called The Free Fall of the American University that documents how, and this is really, again, the relativism in the culture. On the college campus, there's no core curriculum like there used to be. You can graduate you can graduate in obscure, crazy subjects that are completely inapplicable in real life with degrees from Harvard. Because we're relativists, then who's to say this is core curriculum? You know, and so you can study all kinds of crazy things, because of relativism. The core curriculum is now you can go to these and you can target and go to the good classes, but don't think that because they graduated from somewhere that means that they got an education, because it doesn't equal education the way it used to. Free Fall of American University talks about the grade inflation. You know how we've changed the metric on the grades so before like you have a D is an A in some ways, or it's changed that scale, and there's also a financial thing that goes with that. If parents are more pleased to pay out the high tuition for their student if they're getting A's in class versus if they're getting D's. So there's some other, it's not all about money necessarily, but that is a factor. Don't fund your child's destruction. If your young person wants to go to college somewhere and you don't have to do it. Say no, you're still the parent. You're still the parent, they're still the kid, they want your money, they're not entitled to it, don't teach them to be entitled to it. Don't confuse loving your child with your own felt need to be liked by your child. If your child is highly academically focused and spiritually disciplined, that opens up more options for them. Most high school graduates go to college too immature and ill-prepared. Expensive school does not equal quality education. Cheap school does not equal lighter consequences. Persecution can make you stronger, work harder, study more, and be more disciplined. Boot camp before battle. All right, so I went a little longer than anticipated, but I would like to give time for questions because I talked about a great number of things. But does anybody have any questions? Or if everybody wants to run out the door, that's fine too. But
how familiar are you with the ability of Christian day schools to prepare students for life in general and for higher education in particular? Because you really didn't touch on that at all.
Christian education?
Right. You talked about public schools and you talked about home schools. You really didn't address K through 12 Christian schools.
Okay. That's a good option. Private education, Christian education is a good option. I say that with this caveat. Christian schools aren't what they used to be either. I'll tell you what I mean. I spoke at a Christian school in Sioux City. At the time, they had me do chapel, and my subject was truth. That's what I talked about. Now, you already heard me. I'm not a bashful person, so I'm sure there are things that are said that someone could have stepped on somebody's toe. But this isn't really a thing that is like should be this hugely controversial thing. I talked about truth. The people loved it, but it was but it was like, I can't believe he's saying these things. And the superintendent of the school came to me privately and said that was awesome. He said, I do a high school chapel, and this is a school that they teach biblical worldview. They give training in that. So a Christian school and a biblical worldview teaching Christian school are not the same thing. I think biblical worldview is great. We had a Christian school at our church. We supplemented our schooling with biblical worldview materials. I can make all kinds of recommendations on that. But he pulled me aside. He says, I teach worldview, biblical worldview for high school, a group of like 13 kids. Over half of those kids don't believe homosexuality is a sin and abortion is okay in the Christian school. And because he said that homosexuality is a sin, he had angry parents call him and yell at him, how dare you teach that? Well, it's a Christian school. I mean, I get it, it's a hot button issue, but when you can't teach Orthodox Christianity at an Orthodox Christian biblical worldview school without a backlash, that says something about where our culture is shifting. So Christian education, I think, is a good option. The reason I'm excited about homeschool is because the statistics are amazing. But I respect any godly teacher that is being salt and light and helping steer young people in the right direction. That's wonderful. But that's kind of my quick thought.
So would you say overall that college is still worth going to, or would you say it's a valid option to just not go whatsoever?
Oh, I'm not saying don't go to college. I'm saying you don't have to. I'm saying that our default is I'm going to get an education, and I'm going to go make money, and it doesn't always pan out that way. And so I think if you're going to go, make sure that you know what you're there for, and make sure that you've got a good groundwork laid in your belief system, so that when you're attacked, you know what you believe and you stay strong in your faith. So I think I don't subscribe to the philosophy that you have to go to college. I think it's good. I think it is. I think it's necessary in a lot of cases for people to go to college. But I'm not anti-college. I'm saying if you're going to go, make sure that you've done your homework. Make sure that you're prepared, and make sure that you've got some focus.
There are some amazing opportunities for getting a good education without college. If you
Sure.
do Menards, if you go into the team member portal, there are PDF files in construction that you can print off, and there are thousands of them. And I have over 1,000 of them printed off, and I'm reading through them several hours every day and learning a lot. And
Sure.
there's a very good chance that I can move up in my job and get a management position, all without having graduated college. I'm still going to college anyway, but that's just an example of something that my degree would have nothing to do with it. Regarding what you said about college, because I had a question at the same time as you did. You mentioned prestige. I don't know if that was the exact word you used. Prestige and networking.
Credentialism. Yeah.
Credentialism and networking. And for certain jobs, just the job description is all about networking. Lawyers,
Sure.
If you're going to get a political science major, journalism, not all journalists, but a lot of business, and certain forms of the arts. Your entire success in there is being educated on who you know. And if a Christian wants to get involved in these things in a college where there's specific plans to network, how do they network what's your Christian view on network, basically?
Oh, well, I mean, the underlying issue to me is that our first obligation is to God as Christians, and to not do anything, don't make sure that you're not getting a seat at the table by compromising who you are. I give the illustration of Abraham and Lot in the Bible. it says that Lot was sitting in the gate. And the picture there from studying it, the gate was a picture of political influence and those things. But he goes from sitting in the gate that he's some perceived influence in Sodom and Gomorrah. But the moment he tried to stand up, it's in not compromise and appease. The moment he tried, he was completely scorned and reproached. And I think that it's a mistake when we compromise to get a seat at the table of perceived influence by selling our soul to get a position, like what happened with Lot. He didn't sell his soul. He's commended as a righteous person, but he did some things clearly wrong. But Lot compromised. Lot tried to compromise. He tried to do it, and he just was completely reproached. Abraham, as an outsider, stood with God as an intercessor for Sodom and Gomorrah. He had a seat at the table with God versus Lot had a seat at the table with the people of Sodom. And so there's more power in making sure you have a seat at the table with God than it doesn't matter who they are, how esteemed they are. If you have to compromise that to do it, it's not worth it.
May I give a good example of how networking should work?
Sure.
When I served those 2 years in the State House of Representatives, I could tell very quickly who the fellow representatives were that had a biblical worldview. And so we began to meet on a regular basis to discuss legislation, whether it's good legislation or not good legislation. And when we found something that was not good, as a group of what was called black helicopters by Craig Paulson, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, black helicopters would be sent, and this bill has to go down. And that's how networking should work. You can accomplish things together better than you can individually.
Yeah, in general, that's true. It's a general principle. One other thing that I would add to is you can see the downfall of cultures through syncretism. When there was, you go to the Maccabean period in the story of Hanukkah and that, the Jews resisted Hellenization to a degree. So there's something in the Christian faith about sanctification. We're supposed to be salt and light. We're supposed to make contact with the world. We're supposed to engage. But part of what preserved Israel for a season was that they remained separate, and part of what happened where they basically, when they became corrupt, is it started with corrupt religious leaders pandering. The corrupt religious leaders pandered to Antiochus Epiphanes, and then they built a gymnasium, a school of education in Jerusalem, and in that they would be indoctrinated in Greek lifestyle. And part of the requirement was they actually had to be in the nude. And so you can imagine a young people in that kind of environment. So there's something about sanctification that's very important, that you can influence the culture more when they see that there's some lines you don't cross. But otherwise, it's very easy to get on a slippery slope. But it is valuable. We're to be a team. We just want to make sure we're on the right team.
One more thing about networking. On the university campus, we talked about campus ministry not being a real good thing. However, I would tend to disagree with that. InterVarsity Christian Fellowship has a very positive influence on Christians who are there in that university setting.
And to clarify, I didn't mean to imply that it's not a good thing. I was saying it wasn't adequate.
By getting together regularly for Bible studies.
Right, that is a good thing. Yeah, that is a good thing. I'm just saying it's not adequate because even if it's a Christian campus, it's ministry. It's not adequate in general speaking. I'm sure there are exceptions, but in general, it's not adequate to sustain. That there needs to be a stronger connection.
You mentioned about the good thing that students should be somewhat mature spiritually before they go to college. and I heard something on the radio just this past week that really hit me, is that they said that a real need, they say sometimes they say the statistics are high of Christian kids losing their faith when they leave home. But they said very likely they didn't have the faith to begin with.
Right.
Parents are so busy now with mother, dad working and everything. They've seen this need that if a lot of young families agree, we need to be trained in spiritual formation to teach our children in our churches.
Yeah,
And they
that's
were
true.
offering material. I don't know if that was Alice or Baker. Oops, I can't remember what station. It was just a couple days ago. But that hit me, is that is a real need if our young parents were taught how to fit this into their busy lives to be training their children.
Yeah, that's
This is
excellent.
talking along my lines. We have 10 grandchildren, some in public school, some in Christian school, some homeschooled. My underlying prayer for all of them is come from a solid two-parent home. And when you're seeking to marry, do the same thing. Because children cannot function better if they come from a solid two-parent home.
That's
And
true.
with, like when you're saying, with two careers, we're leaving that behind.
And that's probably inevitable, and many of them it's so expensive to live. But there are ways to know of what to not do and take time for what you should do with your family to teach them.
That is true. And I've seen families with lots of children who somehow manage to get by with only one income. Or, so that is not, money is not always the issue. But two-parent home. Because when Ronald Reagan signed no-fault divorce in 1980, he says it was one of the worst decisions he ever made because he began the destruction of marriage. And the women, and of course they get the children usually, that is where the hurt came. And we have never gotten out of that.
And that makes an excellent point. And I think at the same time, just as the young person has to up their game if they're going to go into that environment and they're going to be spiritually strong, as parents, we have to, instead of, and I think some of it too is that the culture was just blindsided to, and I think there were some things that we just took for granted, and that I don't know, just denying how bad things really were or whatnot. But now that we know how bad the culture is, let's change course ourselves. So it's a personal responsibility, it's a parental responsibility.
And to add to what you said, Sharon, the destruction of the family can in large part, I think, be traced back to Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, where the government said, let us be the parents, let us provide the sustenance that a father and a mother should provide for the children, especially the father's role became irrelevant. And I feel like that was a huge change. That was like 1968.
Yeah, and that's where I think also biblical worldview training helps too, because it says, what's the Bible says? The government's responsible to educate my children. That's what people think. Education should be a right promoted by the government. The Bible says parents train up your children. Your parents have that responsibility. That doesn't change whether they're in public school, they're homeschooled. That doesn't change. You're still going to be responsible. So if any of that's delegated, because obviously in scenarios that you can't do 100% of the education, you still have to take ownership to be the most active teacher in your child's life.
And one way we can use the technology, which really drives me nuts, but I can't keep up with it, is a brief note to a grandchild who's somewhere else out there. And just reminding them that you love them, they are in your prayers, and you're hoping that things go well for them in school. Just 2-3 lines. And if you don't do that, you have an envelope and a piece of paper and write them a note. And the post office is still operating.
Any other questions?
You made a comment about homeschool being under attack. Did you mean, is that politically? Is that coming from the education system? Or?
It's coming from all fronts. I mean, that's what you look at cases. I mean, it's outlawed in a lot of countries for the very reason of propagandizing the young people in line with the goals of the state. And so homeschooling is outlawed and perceived as a threat. So yes, of course, it's coming from the NEA it's coming from the traditional sources, but it's really it's under attack by the Democratic Party. It's under attack by people that are well-meaning. Because because like, well, wait a minute, I'm a teacher in a public school and it's not that bad. And but there's a bigger thing going on, and it has to be, it has to be taken. So it's under attack from every which direction. But
is that just in Nebraska, or is that in Iowa that they were just talking about, that the social workers or somebody's got to go into these houses?
Oh yeah, I saw that. I don't know what's.
They don't know what's going on in the homes.
Yeah,
And those
was that Nebraska? Or
that was here.
22
was that Iowa?
Single and no children. What
Right.
tell do they know?
Well, and it's sad to think that we need.
But there's a couple high-profile cases, and then as a result, every homeschool home is suspect.
I
right.
think it is Germany. Parents
Yeah.
go to jail if they're
There's bad things that that's what I was trying to
You
think
know,
of.
ignoring the fact that the bulk of abuse, bullying, whatever it is occurring in the school setting.
Yeah.
Right.
But they will focus on, like in this case, it was one high-profile case.
Right. And that's the go-to or
So sad.
they'll try and find that.
Bringing up the
Big
NEA.
Daddy.
NEA has a new initiative, it's called the Red Initiative, and they're indoctrinating new teachers in social work. And they just started it in the past 2 years. And we can thank Jimmy Carter for that.
Yeah, and that just triggered this. I told you our church had a Christian school, and that was comprised of a lot of the not all the teachers. We had teachers from other churches and things, but we had a lot of teachers that were part of our congregation. We gave them a biblical worldview test and found out, even though they went to church and everything, many of them were socialists in their ideology. Now, they wouldn't call themselves that, but that's where that's very important because, So if that's in the churches, then that shows that we can, it's going to be everywhere. So that's so important because it's eye-opening. Some people, it's just you don't even know the vocabulary. But that's to go to my point earlier about if you don't have a biblical education, you will naturally absorb the cultural view and think that that's Christian. Because that's why I said, read the Humanist Manifesto, and you'll say, wow, that sounds like sermon material that I've heard.
Yeah.
Well, it's not scriptural. In the fundamentals in that are directly opposed to the teachings of Scripture.
Well, you said you gave a chapel speech on truth and you got good response and negative response.
It's not the young people as much that have a problem with it. There might be a handful. Obviously, Antifa and stuff is a lot of young people. But
my question for you is, how would you respond to a head of Christian school who would argue that it's necessary in a Christian institution to bring in speakers who will expose our children who have not yet had their faith fully formed to what might be termed different flavors of Christianity?
Now, did you read the article on Northwest Iowa Review?
I saw.
I didn't necessarily say
I saw Dort getting a lot of hot water, and I saw what Sioux County Conservatives you guys got compared to Westboro Baptist.
Yeah.
That's kind of a go-to, I think.
What they said they wanted.
So I'm just curious how you would respond to that. Is that a reasonable way to help our children develop a solid biblical worldview?
I think.
To have them present not as a debate, not as a discussion, simply to give them the floor.
I think it's worthwhile for them to get a broad education and things, but I think you got to have the fundamentals in place first, because it's you can study an infinite amount of lies. There's a college course that they were teaching over at Buena Vista called "Searching for the Truth," and it was all about searching, but don't you dare find it. It was all about the search for truth. You talk about everything, but just don't find the truth. You can search for it, but you can't find it.
I read where the people who are supposed to pick out counterfeit money, they don't study counterfeit money.
They study the real thing.
thing.
Yeah.
That's not a lot of that.
So I think you got to get the fundamentals first. I've read the Quran. I study abroad. I read liberal stuff all the time.
Quran's cringeworthy.
What?
I've read it too.
Yeah, so that's useful to me in terms of defending my faith. But you're not going to say, you're not going to go to the emperor's here, read the Quran. It's just like for the same principle of, I don't think you should be teaching a kindergartner about sex. I don't think you should be exposing them to things that they wouldn't even be thinking about. I think that's wrong. I think that's immoral. But in terms of exposing them to views, I think you got to get the fundamentals. And right now the fundamentals are so broke. Let's save that open-minded conversation for another day. We've got a crisis. We've got some vitals that need restored. And that is the view that's most censored, because the anti-Christian views are everywhere already. It's the Christians that are strangely silent. So, I think we need more of the Christian viewpoint so that people, to dispel the myth of the boogeyman of the evil Christian and these other views. I think people need to hear the truth, and then the truth speaks for itself. But conversations are worthwhile, but I would start there.
I think that this actually is probably the best time of any point in history to switch to homeschooling your kids, because people might think I'm not qualified to teach my kids, but in my hand I have Wolfram Alpha, an engineering calculator, means of studying foreign languages and practicing their manuscripts. I can research anything that I want using Google. The sheer amount of information that is out there in the palm of your hand, and your ability to interact with that information in meaningful ways far exceeds anything we've ever seen in history. And this can fundamentally change the way that we interact as families, in that if you choose to, you can let this world of information help you educate your children. And you don't have to be intimidated and think, I'm not called to do this because I'm not competent enough.
There's some great stuff out there that wasn't there before. Homeschooling now, that the homeschool network and stuff, it's just incredible. It's incredible. They've got, I homeschool 4 daughters who are brilliant. One's 2, so maybe I'm speaking too soon. But they're very, very intelligent, very well spoken. There's a huge group of other homeschool parents. There's lots of resources that they're always talking. There's stuff marketed on conservative radio all the time. There's resources out there. But regardless, even if you don't feel qualified as a teacher, you are the main teacher in your child's life. You will influence that child more than any other teacher ever will. So might as well make the most of it. So you had something.
Yeah, so great job, by the way, but what do you use? So how are you raised with schooling stuff? Do you homeschool and college with you?
I was Christian school. I was Christian school in elementary and public school, in middle school, high school. I went to Bible college and took a bunch of online Bible school and things. So I wasn't in a conventional secular university. Most of my research and everything, that's what it was. It was more of coming in as a journalist, and because I was on the campus all the time with a young adults ministry and on the dorms and interacting with faculty and things like that. So that's my background. Cool.
I taught 11th grade catechism for 17 years. I'm going to come back to one of your first points. As parents, you are the biggest influence on your kids. And you could tell in class which kids' parents were taking the time with them and spending the time and which weren't. And these kids just want to know the truth. If you're not giving them the truth, then they're going to believe what the other guy's telling them is the truth. So the key point is, and that's why he's pushing homeschooling so much, because of the influence as parents you have on them. If you're not telling them the truth, someone else is going to tell them a lie, and they're going to believe it to be the truth. And it's very important that you give them the truth.
Yeah. I don't.
Recently, a big study was done of 3,000 evangelical kids who had given up the faith. It was done through Anderson Genesis, but he had an independent thing to it. And the result was they found that something like 50% of the kids already gave up their faith after 8th grade. Up until that point. Something like 35% by high school, not that many in college. And then they asked these 3,000 people, when did it happen and how did it happen? A lot of them gave this answer. We go to our Sunday school teacher and say, in science class, we're learning the facts about evolution. And it contradicts what the Bible says. How do you answer these things that seem to contradict the Bible all the way through? The teacher would say, well, we're not going to discuss science here. At Sunday school, we learn stories. And just listen to our stories. And then they go back to school. And, I hear stories in Sunday school. I hear facts and truth in school. And so Answers in Genesis, and puts this out, says it's necessary that in Sunday school we have some apologetic activities. And so they've done that, and they put it on a good Sunday school curriculum. Unfortunately, recently, somebody asked to answer our question to the banner editor. I hear this church is using Answers in Genesis apologetic stuff to help the kids. I think that's a good idea. The banner editor said, no, that's not reform. Well, I'm a student at Westminster Seminary. We spend a lot of time on apologetics, and it really helps you learn. It's a good foundation. Another thing that the study found was what percentage of you went to Sunday school? It was 2011. Many of them, those who went to Sunday school more, ended up with worse idea toward Christianity. Because of the very fact the Sunday school teacher didn't have apologetic answers. How to answer from science as well as scripture, this atheistic view of how the weekend came to be. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of that stuff. Just going back to the lady in our congregation who was teaching, is a Christian. She's been a Christian her whole life. She had a socialist worldview on the test, and that's why I think that's biblical worldview teaching. We did this as our whole youth department. When I first got into worldview stuff, we had the whole youth department go through and test, and I looked at the results, and I sobbed. Because I saw 1 in 5 of these kids aren't even saved. And 2 or 3 are like in the middle, and there's maybe 1 in 5 that I feel like this is a strong Christian universe. 4 out of 5 are in danger of hellfire, the way I was looking at it. And I was so moved by that, that we said, all right, we're going to teach this. We're going to emphasize this. And then we made it incorporate as part of our young adults group, Shama. Is we went through worldview stuff with college age people, and then we took a worldview test, because the test is important, because the test is eye-opening. Because I'm good, I believe, but I know what it's. The test kind of confirms, do you understand how it applies? And by taking that test, it exposes some area. Oh, well, maybe there's some more learning that needs to go on here. And our college age group that went through that worldview training, and we supplemented it into our school, our Christian school. We were adding it everywhere. We were saying, parents, you need to get on this, because you need to be educated. We had resources available in our church bookstore, some stuff by Brandon Howes, which maybe you're familiar with. But we had all this stuff, and our college group took the test, and Dan Smithwick, who I'm friends with, he said your college group tested the highest in the nation for a theological, biblical worldview. And I've tested some of the most conservative Christian universities in the country, and your college-age people tested even higher than that. So if you give them the information, they'll latch onto it just because it's not anywhere else. But it's true. If you don't, then the problem is deeper than the surface, and we've got to. I'm teaching a series at church called Revisiting the Foundations, and the illustration that we used to have it in. I know I'm getting a little late, but I'll end with this, and if there's another question or you want to pull me off the stage, then go ahead. But we used to have a youth center called Joel's Place, and it was a fun facility for the teens, but it stank terribly and the roof leaked, and there was like a chronic leak. The place smelled like wet cats all the time, no matter how much you cleaned it. And the roof was leaking, and it was very frustrating. We'd have 55-gallon drums of just overflowing with water in the rain, and so it was just like, stop the leak, Stop the leak. This is so irritating. And so, well, the issue is you can, because of the style of the roof and such, you can keep fixing the leak, the roof, but you can't fix the problem because the problem is in the foundation. If you don't fix the foundation, the roof can't be fixed. I think that's a metaphor for our Christian life, period, and young people, is we have to stop reacting to the water dripping on our heads and stop trying to combat it at that level. We have to go to the foundation and repair the foundation so the building of their life is built correctly, because you can pick at the superficial issues all day. It's the thing that's below the surface that nobody sees, and for the Christian, that's doctrine. That's the house built on the rock versus the house built on sand. Doctrine, simply defined, is what you believe. But is the teachings of Christ applied in how you're building your life, or is it compartmentalized in how you're building your life as a house built on sand because it's not connected to the biblical worldview? So we have to get to the stuff that's below the surface, and that's doctrine. That's Bible doctrine, the basics, apologetics of what we believe. If we fix that, it'll help correct the course in life. So because we can pick at all kinds of issues, but that's the most fundamental. We've got to fix the foundation, otherwise we're just going to keep patching the roof. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much. You've been very good.